Alright guys, so let's go ahead and do it. Let's do it. So Andrew Wilson is going to debate Dave Smith. I'm going to give you guys the openings statements right here. I don't know, they never timestamp the stuff, so I got you boys. I'm going to react to it, and it's going to be a cool opening. I think the argument is going to be Andrew Wilson is basically going to argue for the existence of an objective entity and necessity of that. Besides that, you're going to be lost in the sauce. And he gives a cool argument for that, and that's what I believe it's going to deteriorate into. They're going to fall back on how would we trust this, and that's where the evidence is going to go. I don't know why it drew out to 2 hours, so we will check that out, but let's just jump right in, boys.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Dave, for coming into tonight's debate. I appreciate it. I want to let you know the reason I'm having this debate with you is because I think I can bring you to the dark side of the Force, and you're already halfway there. My hope is to convince you to get to the rest of the way there. Libertarianism is, in the end, a system which inevitably leads to degeneracy. The reason libertarians currently have a Skittles nominee for president is because the very ideology itself is corrupt. It starts with the very core idea on which all other ideas are based, which is self-ownership. I know this is a doctrine that Mr. Smith does believe because I have seen him reference it multiple times in multiple appearances, most recently on Reason TV in his case against open borders. It's a failing dogma because it opens up the ultimate can of worms. If people really do own themselves, then we really can't engage with any voluntary actions they take with each other and stop them, overrule them, or force them not to do those actions. This is exactly why Skittles in society exists. By this logic, we can't outlaw incest, prostitution. We can't outlaw gay marriage. We can't outlaw polygamy. We can't even outlaw unaliving yourself. All things which Christian ethics point to as absolutely immoral. Dave can't really say that they are, though. They have to be allowed if you own yourself, or it would be a violation of the self-ownership doctrine. It's nice and all that Mr. Smith has distanced himself from the failure that is the modern Libertarian Party, and I applaud him for doing it, but ultimately, the very reason he had to is because of this reason. It always leads to the absurd outcome of mass degeneracy. It has to. There's no way around it. Dave assumes, for reasons I don't understand, that his solution of non-promotion yet legalization somehow better than the alternative of the state utilizing authority to remove these moral plagues. I want the state busting up prostitution rings and pimps. I want them arresting incest practitioners, and I want them to arrest polygamists. I want them to use force to prevent unaliving of oneself. The anarcho-capitalist, in this case Dave, can't justify the state really doing any of those things. The Christian ethicist can, striking a key balance between what he would call totalitarianism and what are considered freedoms. For us, though, Mr. Smith has outlined a plan, one he often repeats. His plan is to have libertarians move into positions of governance in order to take control of key systems and then abolish them eventually in hopes that we eventually get to some kind of anarcho-capitalist society over time. He says this because, quote, the perfect is the enemy of the good. This means, of course, that because a thing isn't perfect doesn't mean we shouldn't move to what's better, even if what's better isn't perfect. So that the audience knows, this is also the exact plan of socialists. They also want to seize government institutions, abolishing power over time, in order to end up with a stateless society, just like Dave wants. It's amusing to note that ultimately what both sides are really fighting over is the power of the state and the use of its force. It's hilarious to me that Christians have fallen for any libertarian dogma at all. We have every right to rule as much as the secularists, and the right to wield state power how we see fit to exercise our will, just as the libertarian Mr. Smith wants to do himself.
So his point is the Christian ethicists believe that they should have the state involved and should be the one enforcing the rule of law upon you, and should be able to enforce upon you certain conditions, limitations, and restrictions of your own behaviors. And that's actually gonna give them also the ability to enforce it, and he's actually totally okay with it. And I think his argument is that Dave cannot say why his own system where your own morality guides you, or that you own yourself. I don't know what that argument of the self-ownership is coming from. I don't know if that's actually digging on Dave Smith, or that's actually a position Andrew Wilson is trying to force upon this debate, is that you as a libertarian do not have that self-ownership. I guess libertarians in general have that dogma that you self-own yourself, and that's basically the representation, the beginning of all of their rights. So it makes sense why Andrew Wilson starts from there. He's like, you cannot own yourself, and because if you do own yourself, then we cannot stop you from doing all these things that can be very destructive to society. And for us Christians, we actually basically religious people, traditional people, we believe we should be allowed to punish people if they come over our limits, and we should be able to enforce that punishments in the way we see fit, according to what we believe is the objective entity that's guiding us seeing fit. So when basically he's saying we just are like, we're different than you, but you cannot say we're not better than you, so why should you be able to stop us? I guess that's where I think Andrew Wilson is going to try to take the argument. So let's keep going.
And as the socialists want to do. Mr. Smith definitely can't argue we shouldn't, as if traditional Christians were in power, society would certainly be better than it is now. And, well, if it's not perfect, well, perfection is the enemy of the good. Christian ethics is a superior system of justification, starting points, which reject libertarian axioms, including that of self-ownership, on which the non-aggression principle must base itself. I'd like to see Dave demonstrate for us that self-ownership is true. I'm willing to be convinced, but thus far I most certainly am not. I'd like him to finally clarify his oughts, and if incest ought be allowed, if it isn't reproductive, if homosexual marriage ought be allowed, if polygamous marriages ought be allowed, and if unaliving yourself ought be allowed. Anytime in the past I have seen Dave push on these ought claims, he's somewhat evasive and dodgy. And I think it's time to get clear positions and note what he actually does want in society, not as preferences go, but as his ought of self-ownership demand people be allowed to do. With no evasion, tell us what is true, that you do believe prostitutes ought to be able to be prostitutes if they want, that those who want to unalive ought to be able to do that polygamists ought to be able to marry as many people as they want, that Skittles people ought to be able to get married, to want to unalive ought to be legal regardless of the drug. I'd like to get into these distinct philosophies. I think that's enough for us to start with. And with that, I'll yield my time to Dave.
All right, guys. So yeah, exactly what I was thinking. He's like, you cannot tell us why incest is good. Why should we actually trust that your own self-guidance is going to be actually a good guide? And I would love to hear that argument. So let's go ahead and hear Dave's argument here. I think it's going to be a very short intro. I'm going to go ahead and speculate here.
Okay. All right, Dave, whenever you're ready, go ahead. You got up to 7 minutes.
Sure. So as I said, I'll make my opening a bit of a response to yours, because I'm just...
That's the worst way you could ever do debates. Ever. Look, if I'm going to come and debate you... Look, if I'm going to come and debate you... You hear me? If we're going to debate... Your argument cannot be a response to my argument. You need to give me your argument, and you will hear my argument. Then I will respond to your argument. Then you will respond to my argument. Then we start the discussion. That's how debates supposedly should go. But the idea, and maybe they will change. Maybe it'll just be an intro and then immediately a discussion. There won't be even a response. But usually it will be an intro. But well, this guy intros, this guy intros, this guy responds to the intro, this guy responds to that intro. Then they discuss their responses and their intros together. And that's how you do that debate. But the idea that there's no intro anymore, and I'm just going to skip into the response phase, is extremely, man, I want to just say fallacious. This is fallacious. Because there's no better word for this. Like, how are you going to describe this in a better way? That he just really doesn't have an argument besides he wants to prove you wrong. That's literally his whole argument. That's why I call it fallacious. But yeah, I digress. I'll move on. Let's hear his response here / intro.
Meeting you guys tonight, and I didn't exactly know what I was
actually
in
didn't
for.
expect this to
But
happen.
I will say that I know Andrew. I have seen on Twitter you in your bio you refer to yourself as a paleoconservative, and that I would just say. Sorry, were you going to say something? Oh no, sorry. I would just say that I'm very interested in the re-energizing of that term, and that there are people who consider themselves paleoconservatives today. I'm a big let's just say I was very influenced, and I've read a lot of paleoconservative thinkers, Paul Gottfried, Pat Buchanan, Sam Francis, guys like this. One of the things that I think was great about all of those guys was that they all, the term paleoconservative actually came from hearkening back to the old right, which were a group of anti-statist right-wingers back who were, fighting the New Deal and fighting keeping America out of World War I and out of World War II. I would just say in response to some of the things you said there, the idea of libertarianism and self-ownership.
Before he jumps into the response, what did he just say? I don't know what he just. I guess he forced upon Andrew the label paleoconservative, then went ahead and attacked the paleoconservative movement or the leaders of that movement. And what is that? And then he moves on now. Let me respond. What was that whole 2-minute thing? Like, what was that? Now, if Andrew Wilson ascribes to paleo conservatism, that kind of makes sense now. Why he would be attacking that and attacking the leaders of that, but he wasn't even very clear in that way. He was just kind of ad hominem attacking them, like kind of, hey, they're right wingers, That's how it felt, right? I could be wrong, but the way it felt, like there was no real evidence base. It's just this is how he felt about them, and it reminded him of a couple of guys that were, I guess, bad in his opinion. I don't know. He didn't provide anything. Just gave him a couple of names. Now he's moving on to the next response. But this is kind of weird. Like, what's happening here, Dave? Are you not prepared at all? Did you even know you're coming to the debate? Why are you, not taking Andrew Wilson seriously? Why did he trap you? Is this an entrapment? Did you not know you're coming to a debate? Like, what is this? This is really weird. The way that he's, first of all, not trying to force an intro and then forcing these weird definitions on Andrew Wilson, then strawmanning basically his positions and attacking them, and it's kind of weird. And he said he's going to respond to the intro from Andrew Wilson, so I'm excited to hear this. Let's see.
Does not at all imply that anyone is allowed to do whatever they want to do, and it certainly doesn't imply that you can't say something as horrifically immoral, even if it doesn't violate the principle of self-ownership. Certainly, property rights would be a great example of where someone wouldn't be allowed to do whatever they want to do if they were on someone else's property who didn't wish to allow them to do that. I think that a lot of the later stuff we probably have to get into in the back and forth and when we're asking each other questions. I think there are lots of examples of degeneracy that you could bring up and ask whether I think we ought to be allowed to do them or not. The question to me isn't so much whether we ought to be allowed to do them, it's how society ought to treat them and what exactly has led us to the point where these awful things are so celebrated. So I'm sure there'll be more time to get into all of these things, but I would just say that I think from what I'm hearing at the beginning here, there's a big misunderstanding of what exactly it is I stand for, and also what kind of the tradition of resisting centralized authoritarian control is really all about. But I'm happy to talk more about this.
Dave's position here is that resisting authoritarian control does not, I guess, is a good position, and he doesn't understand why Andrew Wilson would be attacking that position himself. I don't even understand what this debate is. This opening was kind of weird. Let's just jump and give you guys the meat and potatoes of this debate right now.
Dave, can you demonstrate for us how you own yourself?
Well, what exactly do you mean by that?
Do you own yourself?
Yes.
Can you demonstrate that?
I mean, I'm demonstrating. We're both demonstrating it right now on this show.
Well, you're not demonstrating that you own yourself.
What do you mean by own?
Well, I think that ownership of a thing is just a social construction. That ownership itself is just a parameter of agreed upon criteria.
Oh, okay, but if you were to...
hang on, let me finish the point.
Sure.
For which, so that's how we know. So I own that guitar because we agree that I own that guitar. That's it. That's the only reason I own it. I don't think that there's anything that you can point to that would demonstrate that this exists outside of a social construction we agree to.
Okay. Well, I'm missing your point here.
My point is that I think it's a social construction when you say that you own yourself. I don't think that
I didn't say it's not a social construction. But
well, then you don't own yourself?
That's a false binary. I'm not. Hold on one second. Listen,
No. That's a law of logic. You either do or you don't.
No, I didn't say. No, you're asking me if I do or I don't. Do you own that guitar?
Yeah.
Okay, but you just said it's a social construct.
Yeah, but I gave you the criteria for the social construct would be an agreement of.
And I said I own myself.
Right, but when you say...
So as much as you own that guitar, you've
This is
nothing.
Incorrect. When I say, do you own yourself? And you say, I'm not sure. Law of logic would...
No.
Hang on, let me finish.
I said yes.
Yeah, the law of excluded middle is going to show this. It can only be yes or no. Do you have self-ownership? Yes or no. I own the guitar because we agree we do. Do you only own yourself because we agree you do?
Well, I don't agree that that's what ownership means, but you said yes and I said yes, so we're both exactly even.
Well, then I want to know Then I want to know how you own yourself.
Well, look, if you actually look up ownership in like a dictionary, I think the definition that you gave would be a little bit different than that. So, do I exercise my control over myself? Do I do so morally? Yes, I think so. And I actually think that in order for us to even have this conversation, we both have, in a sense, agreed to that principle.
I don't think we have.
It's me versus you.
How have we
do you
agreed?
own the arguments that you're making so far in this conversation?
You don't.
Oh my God, Dave Smith, what are you doing, Dave Smith? Okay, let's see if Andrew Wilson actually can explain this to him slowly.
Well, how do you own an argument?
No, I mean, when I say that, I mean, is it yours?
It came out of my mouth, sure.
I think they're misunderstanding the definition.
Words you're saying yours.
But how would that make the application that I own that thing?
Well, look again. Define own.
I think that the definition of ownership.
Okay, good. They're actually getting to the definition. Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Like, why they're doing all of that? Define it immediately.
Would be a social construct in which you and I, via agreement criteria, decide that X thing becomes property which is assigned to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So if that's true,
by that definition, do you own yourself?
No.
I would say by the definition of that social construction, I could say that you own yourself. Sure.
Oh, okay.
But that doesn't mean anything. Let me explain why.
Okay.
Because if the social,
what did we just do this whole time?
Okay, I think he misspoke here. I think he actually misspoke here. I think he was supposed to say that I do not actually own myself. Unless the definition is something I didn't understand. Wait.
Again, define own.
I think that the definition of ownership would be a social construct in which you and I, via agreement criteria, decide that X thing becomes property which is assigned to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So if that's true,
by that definition, do you own yourself?
I would say by the definition of that social construction, I could say that you own yourself. Sure.
Oh, okay.
But that doesn't mean anything. Let me explain why.
Okay.
Because if
he's right, he didn't misspeak, but that means you can also own slaves. Like, why could you stop me from owning?
What did we just do this whole time?
Let me explain. Because if the social construction, what if we change the social construct and we decide that you can own a person, Dave?
Right. Okay. And what if we change the social construct and says I own your guitar and I own you? What are you?
That's exactly right. What if we change the social construction of ownership to mean you can own a person? Does that mean that people no longer own themselves?
Well, the difference here, right, is that, and it's the word that I mentioned that you didn't, is that I would say that ownership.
Andrew Wilson's trying to prove that you do not own yourself, and he's doing that by telling him, hey, if you own yourself, that means you can relinquish that right and have somebody else own you. So it's not right for you to own yourself. I don't think you have your own right to own yourself, and I don't think you have the right to relinquish your own ownership of yourself. Is, I think, Andrew Wilson's argument here. And Dave Smith is like, no, you should be able to relinquish your own right to own yourself. But that's a very hard argument to actually make. That so he's not actually making it. He's acting like he doesn't understand the argument, but that's the only argument he can actually answer this with. He has to be able to say, yes, my own self-ownership, which allows me to own myself, also condemns me to my own desires and my own wills, and whatever it's willing me and desiring me, I should be allowed to do, even if it is to sell my own self to another human being. Against the, even maybe if the society wills it. I mean, I get the argument from Andrew Wilson. If you give yourself self-ownership and you give yourself your own ownership, and you own yourself, it's not that you have rights upon your own body. It's not, no, you own it, and everyone has rights upon you about that about yourself. That means then they can also take those rights from you any moment they want. And you shouldn't allow that. So basically, I guess that's his argument against self-ownership. And Dave Smith is not really making an argument against it. All he's trying to do is trying to misunderstand. Now, I could be wrong. Let's just jump back in, and somebody down in the comment section correct me. But let's get
would imply that you're
I don't want to
justified
anybody's argument
in that claim.
How are you justified in that claim?
How am I justified in the claim of owning myself?
Yeah, you just said if you agreed it's
Okay.
a social construction. So if we agree that it's a social construction, then we can own other people as via social construction.
So
that would be justified.
Well, I don't think so. So the major difference there, right, is that as we're having this conversation, and clearly what's the goal here? To persuade, probably not to persuade each other, but at least to persuade the audience who's listening to us. Because we recognize that they are in control. Forget the word own, because that's triggering, evidently. But they are
I'm not triggered by the word own.
Okay. When I say triggering, meaning that's going to start a whole nother debate about semantics. So
yeah, but semantics are important in a debate.
Okay, well, all right. Let's not do this tactic of interrupting every 2 seconds. So let me just finish my point here. So we are both presuming that the people who are listening to this are in control of their own thoughts, and we could potentially persuade them toward our cause. And so if we're doing all of this, we kind of are recognizing in some sense that it's more valuable to persuade people than it is to, I don't know, just enforce our will on them.
Wait, what is this argument, man? What? You just said he won. He won what? Do you even know what his argument is? His argument, we do own ourselves and we can own people, but what we do is we persuade ourselves away from that. Well, how do you know that? 100 years ago, you didn't know that. Maybe in 100 years, you will fall back to your own desires. Like, what are you talking about? This is a ridiculous argument that he's arguing that we went away from that. Well, I'm arguing maybe you'll fall back into that. How do you know you're not going to fall back into that? How do you know you don't make it a necessity? Because presumably the society necessitizes it, I guess. So, and then he has to agree with it. Like, the problem with him is he's the same person that says, the owners of slaves were so wrong for owning slaves. But then in the future, when his society owns slaves, according to his own arguments, he's forced to either persuade them against that or just follow. I don't know what he's going to be. Follow the... Literally, he said the word persuade instead of control. I don't know what he's even trying to imply here. That you can persuade people away from buying people and owning them, if that's possible. I don't know if you can persuade that, that was the biggest trade in the world.
And so in that sense, I would say that, yes, there is some kind of norm that there's a justifiable path where you can persuade people versus force them.
Sure. Well, I agree that you can persuade all sorts of people and that can be part of a societal norm and that everybody can agree that that's part of a societal
Right.
norm. That does not demonstrate that you own yourself. Thus, the key principle for the non-aggression principle, which is self-ownership, that's where the violation comes in. Do people own themselves? Is that a justified position or isn't it?
I'm saying that, yes, I think it is. But again,
Then can you demonstrate it?
Well, what would you mean by that? What would it mean to demonstrate that you own
would
yourself?
you
What
would
do you
have
mean?
to prove that you own yourself.
That I can control myself, or what? Again, just be clear about what you're asking.
Well, here, let me give you an
Demonstrate-
example.
just
Yeah, I'll
me
give
an
you
example.
an example to the contrary. I have seen throughout all
They've been talking for 10 minutes and Dave Smith is still acting like he's stupid and doesn't know what self-ownership is. It's because he has no answer. I'm telling you, the only answer is, yeah, of course they can own themselves. What are you talking about? Yeah, of course they can sell people. If the society deems that, yeah, well, the rights could be given to somebody else. It could be signed on a piece of paper. And you could actually buy and
Moral.
sell those rights. Yes, you can make him a materialistic thing. Why not? Actually, he will actually condone, like he will be in agreement with it. He won't condemn it. And this is why Dave Smith has to act stupid, and he's been doing that for 20 minutes.
That one person
ourselves
should
booty.
own themselves rather than
No.
someone else own them. Is that
that's
the
not
question?
that's not the question.
I mean, I'll do anything for a sub. I'll do
The
anything.
question. So here's the question. Let me explain it to you.
Okay.
The non-aggression principle itself revolves around the idea that human beings own themselves. Correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So the thing is that you and I can agree that there's been tons and tons of slavery throughout human history, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So those people clearly own these other people. So this has to be a social construction of agreement is what is ownership. We agree that you own it, therefore you own it. What I'm asking for is some type of justified evidence that that is not the case and that there is some moral ought or some type of demonstration philosophically or otherwise that a human being actually owns themselves.
Okay. So just to be clear here, if I were to say, if you're saying ownership meaning just strictly control over who has something, then yes, there have been lots of times where people can come just take all your stuff and then claim they own it. And if you're saying the law recognizes it or the society recognizes it, then essentially they own it. So in
They
a
can do that
sense-
with people too, right?
right. And in a sense, I agree with you. And that
So then
that
you
has
don't own
happened-
yourself.
Okay. Let me just finish what I'm saying.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. I mean, dude, we got a long show here, so let's just
I get what Andrew's doing. He's kind of frustrated, but yeah, he needs to calm down.
let each other talk.
Because Dave is playing a game here, and he wants to. Dave obviously came unprepared, so just calm down on him, man. Let him make a fool out of himself.
So in a sense, I agree with you. Yes, you can take possession of something. I don't think anybody is arguing that, and I don't think it's a very impressive point to make. That yes, people can take possession of something, and that could be
Bro,
codified
Why are you using somebody else's emotes? Use mine. Guy on the left lost.
by
Bro, why
law
you
or
saying that?
society. What we're talking about is something slightly different, which is justified ownership over something. So
Right.
then the claim is like whether it's morally right that you own this or not. Fair enough. And I'm
Yeah.
sure there's lots
I'm just
of
looking
areas,
for the
but I'm sure
demonstration
there's
of what is
lots
morally right. Sure.
Sure. Well, okay. If you're looking for the demonstration of what is morally right, I'm
No
sure there's
answer.
lots of areas where you would believe something is morally right and something else is wrong. And the demonstration of it would be what? That this is what you believe. This is what seems to be right and wrong. This is what has been accepted. And
No, my justification would be divine command, not seemings or phenomenal conservatism,
okay,
which is what
sure,
seemings
sure.
are.
So okay, but so divine command. So
Mm-hmm.
what? And how would you exactly determine what is and isn't divine command?
Let's assume for a second that I was, I don't know, like delirious, right? And just thought I talked to God and he gave me commands, right? If it's just preference, if we're just going off of preference, just things which Dave prefers are true, and Dave just prefers that you own yourself because he does, then any preference that I came up with in this delirious state where God was speaking directly to me would be just as valid as whatever preferences that you just axiomatically come to because you just want them to be true. My claim here is that libertarianism, at its foundation, at its fundamental foundation, is flawed because this axiom of self-ownership isn't actually true, but rather a social construction which is asserted as though it is a truism when it clearly is not. So it's a fundamental flaw. The reason that you guys come up with such absurd conclusions like that prostitution ought to be legal and all these other things is, and by the way, Dave, you have to end up with that. Otherwise, people don't own themselves. Do you think the state should come in and, like, you know, stop your brother from unaliving himself, for instance? Do you think that they should do that?
Well, hold on. All right, stick with your point that you were making at first.
I think that's it. I'm gonna end that here. Clear as day. Finally, Dave, I think, has to, and actually did, concede that. Sure, I really don't. I mean, he's gonna have to concede that he really doesn't have self-ownership. He actually gave that to the divine command. He's like, oh yeah, the divine command is what gives me my own ability to, like, he basically gave me the right to own this thing, and he's the owner of that thing. Basically, he took Andrew Wilson's argument and mirrored it either in a mimicking way, in a mocking way, like, oh haha, or it's the only way he really can respond to this argument, which makes sense. And at least it's the only way that will reach somewhere quickly, because that's where basically let's argue this. Why is my position wrong? Because you're holding the same position. But Andrew Wilson's like wanted him to get there. He wanted him to yeah, you have to agree with me. Your self-ownership is actually not real. Like, you cannot own yourself. You're given these rights, and they can be taken away from you at any point. So you need to be very careful. And basically, the divine command is the one that gives you these rights. So you say, this is belonging to God, but He gave it to me. And I think that's where he was trying to get to the conclusion. And I think Dave Smith actually agreed with him. Interested in your opinions, guys. Let's play with some balls and subscribe.